So I can see my co-chair Iris Lansdorf is online. So Iris, welcome. I'll now open the meeting and thank Iris for helping me co-chair this session. This is the second Working Group 2 meeting in the COVID and Cancer Global Modelling Consortium. And we're really delighted that the focus of today will be on providing some initial results from one of the collaborative projects on colorectal cancer screening, as well as talking about research priorities for some of the other streams of work. I want to send you all my best wishes for wherever you are and wherever you're dialing in from. I hope that you and your family and colleagues remain healthy and safe in these difficult times. And I also wanted to note that this is the first of 2 separate calls that we'll be running for this working group. So there's another on which will be a better time for our North American colleagues in about 12 hours time. I also wanted to note that there's another call on this week, which will be the combined Working Group 1 and 3 call. So if you've registered your interest in the prevention or cancer treatment and outcomes aspect of the modelling consortium activities, please note that that meeting will be happening in Wednesday, Thursday, in the Wednesday-Thursday timeframe, depending on your time zone. And do contact the Secretariat, as always, with any questions about organisational issues. So I'll just move on to quickly cover our agenda for today. So welcome and introductions. I'll just, before I move on, check that Iris, that you have a sound connection. Can we just check that we have you online? If everyone will bear with me, I'll just make sure that Iris is unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Perfect. Thank you. You worried me for a second. I thought, oh, gosh, I'm going to have to do all of the sections that you were going to cover.
No, sorry. I have to do this in a new way because I'm working from the office today and trying to get everything sorted out, but it's working.
Oh, fantastic. And welcome and congratulations on making it back into the office environment. Okay, thanks, Iris. So just to quickly run through our agenda, we do have some administration issues to cover off in the first part of the meeting. So an update on the development and ratification of the terms of reference for the consortium, update on disclosures as our usual process, an update on the Teams page for the collaborative site that we're using for working together. We're going to have an update from Dr. Jabin Liu from the Cancer Council New South Wales team on the model platforms that we've received for screening. And then Iris is going to give us the snapshot of initial results from the collaborative modelling of colorectal cancer screening disruptions, which has been ongoing. We're then going to go into a discussion of the work of the other teams and projects which are being set up now, and talk through their data sources, but most importantly, open it up, we hope, for fairly extensive discussion on the research priority questions for those projects, and then move to future call schedules and any other business. So just a recap of the structure of our consortium and our working group. So a reminder, and I hope you can see my pointer, that all of our activities are under the auspices of the COVID-19 and Cancer Global Task Force, which has 3 streams of work. One is characterising cancer treatment disruption. So there's data collection activities there involving surveys of cancer treatment services in the first instance, but that will connect into IARC's registry activities. And a second stream of work is also doing quite a lot of work on psychosocial impact for patients and healthcare workers. But we sit in as complementary to both of these other streams, the Global Modelling Consortium, which has a steering group which represents each of the partners, and you can see the partners at the bottom of the screen here. And a reminder that as a modelling consortium, we have 3 working groups. Number 1 is predicting the impact of infection on cancer outcomes and treatment services. Working Group 2, this working group, predicting impact on cancer screening and recovery services. And Working Group 3, predicting impact on cancer risk and recovery prevention strategies. So more of a prevention focus. Now, under the screening working group, we have, at our last meeting, we had the proposal to focus on 5 active project teams. Firstly, looking at CRC screening, colorectal cancer, bowel cancer screening, then breast cancer screening, cervical screening with a high income country focus, delays to cervical cancer elimination with potential delays at least, and their impacts from a low and middle income country focus, and delays to lung screening implementation. I'm going to say up front that we need to make sure we connect in closely with our WHO colleagues, and I can see some on the line in terms of the discussion about the best way that we can support WHO in its elimination activities. And so that won't be a big discussion today, but we do hope to get on to some of the key research questions for the other project teams. Now, moving on to item 2, I just want to remind you that we as a consortium have been developing a terms of reference, which we would like all members to review and agree to. And you'll find the latest, and we hope penultimate draft in your meeting request. And we'd like you to, if you would like to contribute, take one last look at this terms of reference, because we will close comments for the first iteration of this Friday, July 3rd, and we will aim to ratify it by the CCGMC Steering Committee next Friday, July 10th. And I just wanted to, while we're on this, and you're welcome to go through the document in its entirety, but just draw your attention to some key incorporations that we've now made as a result of the consultation process that we've been through, and draw your attention to the changes and additions to the document. Just a reminder that we envisage this document is intended to capture that we have an open and collaborative approach. Our key principles are sharing our learnings, co-publication, capacity building, and taking the longer term perspective, and developing tools that will be widely in understanding that. Firstly, as we did briefly discuss, we are following IARC WHO principles, and therefore ask that industry and commercial representatives take the role of an observer in our activities. Secondly, we have extended our guidelines for authorship, and the key principle is that we will be following common conventions for contribution and authorship, but it is planned that all working group members will be acknowledged for publications of the consortium, with the authors listed alongside the statement on behalf of the applicable working group of the COVID and Cancer Global Modelling Consortium. The other main addition is that the working group chairs will determine whether minutes and presentations can be posted on the website in full, but because we, of course, will be sharing some in-confidence preliminary results, including today, in our meetings, we will remove these prior to posting as required. But they'll be available to you to view on the shared workspace within our team's website instead. So again, please contact the Secretariat if you have any final comments on the terms of reference. And just before we go on, I'd like to, as always, go through the disclosures for our meeting in accordance with best practice. And I'm just showing the slides here with all the disclosures that we have received. I won't read them out. Thank you very much for forwarding those in. Okay, and these will be made available in the slide pack on the website. Okay, so moving on to item 4, just an update that we're really delighted that we've launched the shared workspace for the consortium. So this is a place where we can, in confidence, share files, work together, have Zoom-style meetings, and so on and so forth. So there is now this shared workspace created on Microsoft Teams. You'll see here we have the main site working group 2 screening, and then the 5 project teams that I mentioned here. If you haven't been contacted already, and if you have a Microsoft account, you would be eligible to join. So please follow the instructions on the invitation email that should have been sent to you by the Secretariat and by the IT team at CCNSW. But if you require further assistance, as always, contact our brilliant consortium Secretariat, which is Harriet Hui and Catherine Barron, at the email address here, covidandcancer@nswcc.org.au. And for those that don't know, we do have our now live website, which is intended to be a place where you can find the latest updates on meeting times, minutes, and other key information for the consortium. So now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jae-bin Liu, who's going to update us on the platforms that, and information on the models that we have for the screening side of the consortium. Over to you, Jae-bin.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. I'm going to give you a quick summary of the model description form that we have received so far. A few weeks ago, we have asked members to put forward any models that they would like to bring into this working group for planning purpose. And so far, we have received 15 forms for model that is either developed or under development. And that include 18 screening models for breast, colorectal, cervical, and lung cancer. The majority of these cancer screening models are microsimulation models, and there are 2 multi-state live table models. Next slide, please. The 18 cancer screening models that currently put forward to the working groups are developed for different countries. And some of this model can be used to simulate multiple country settings. Countries covered by these models are summarized in this table here by world regions. The numbers in the bracket next to the country indicate the number of models that have been currently put forward that have already been developed or currently under development for that country in particular. From this table, we can see that cervical cancer models covers countries in all world regions. Breast, colorectal, and lung cancer model cover mostly countries in the Europe, the America and the Caribbean, and the Oceania regions. We are still very interested in hearing about the additional models that are available. You're welcome to submit the model description form if you have not done it already. I will now pass over to Iris, who is going to give an update on colorectal cancer screening modeling.
Thank you very much, Jae-bin. Thank you very much, everybody, for being present at this meeting. I'm very pleased to present on behalf of the colorectal cancer modeling groups our initial results. Next slide, please. So to give you a heads up, currently we have 4 models involved in the initial colorectal cancer modeling that we started. These models are from Australia, the Policy 1 bowel cancer model from Cancer Council New South Wales, the OncoSim model from Canada, from the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer and Statistics Canada. And from the Netherlands, we have the ASCA model from the Decision Modeling Center in the Amsterdam UMC, and the MISCAN model from Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. In addition, we have several other modeling groups that have joined the colorectal cancer team. They will not participate in this initial work, but they will start to participate in later works, which includes people from Ireland, Basque Country, and Japan for now, and others that are interested in joining, please let us know, and we will, of course, be happy to open up the collaboration for future projects. Next slide. All of the models involved so far are microsimulation models, and in this graph you see an example from the ASCA model how this works. The ASCA model models 2 pathways to colorectal cancer, the adenoma carcinoma pathway, which constitutes about 85% of colorectal cancers, and the serrated pathway, which constitutes approximately 15% of colorectal cancers. And you see in the pathway that everybody starts off without having adenomas or serrated lesions, and in some people, either adenomas or serrated lesions or both start to develop, they grow in size, and with increasing size or morphologic characteristics, the probability of this adenoma developing in, or serrated lesion developing into colorectal cancer increases. This is just an example of one of the models, but actually in structure, all the models are quite similar. However, they differ quite in some of the underlying assumptions, and that will influence the results, as we will see later on. Next slide, please. I think, Joachim, you would be saying something now from the Australian situation?
Sure, thanks, Iris. I'm Joachim Wellington from Cancer Council New South Wales. So we modelled the Australian colorectal cancer screening program, which is the National Bowel Cancer Screening Program, or NBCSP. So the NBCSP provides IFOBT screening biannually from age 50, 52, 54 up to age 74. It's been rolled out from 2006, starting with just 2 ages, to full coverage of all those ages from 2019 onwards. Participation in the program is at about 41% for the initial IFOBT screening and at about 71% for compliance to follow-up colonoscopies. So some caveats with that. The compliance to follow-up colonoscopies is understood to be underreported, and we only have participation data to 2017. So most notably, we don't have participation data for any time during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this participation rate is also a bit lower than other countries, which will manifest itself in our results. So on the next slide. Thank you. So our model that we use to look at the NBCSP is the Policy 1 bowel microsimulation model, which, as we saw on the slide earlier, like the structure of the ASCA model, models conventional adenomas and serrated lesions in an individual, and has detailed modelling of the screening program in Australia. Thanks, Iris.
No problem. I'm assuming that we might not have anybody from Canada on the call right now, but I'm just giving somebody a chance to speak up because I cannot see all the participants.
Yeah, I don't think this is the best time for Canada right now.
Yeah.
It's
So I'll say something about the Canadian model then. I think they will be on the other call. So in Canada, like in Australia, they have biannual screening with the fecal immunochemical test between ages 50 and 74 years. They are actually quite similar in participation. So approximately 42% of the people invited for screening participate in FIT. They have a slightly different program in the fact that if you do not participate in your initial invitation, you are not invited for future screening, so they only have an 80% risk screening rate of those who have participated before, and their compliance to follow-up colonoscopy is slightly higher than what is reported in Australia, I should say, which is about 80%. So the model that they have is a mathematical simulation model that is adapted to the Canadian setting, and it's called OncoSim. And like the other models, it models the natural history and progression of adenomas to colorectal cancer. It doesn't have an exclusive serrated lesion pathway. Next slide, please. Maybe Francine or Marjolein, you want to say something about the Dutch colorectal cancer screening program?
Yeah, I will tell you something about it. I'm Francine from the Decision Modeling Center in Amsterdam. And in the Netherlands, we have a national colorectal cancer screening program. Individuals between the age of 55 and 75 are biannually invited for FIT screening. And the implementation of this program started in 2014, which was with a phased rollout phase. And from 2019 onwards, there has been full coverage. Around 73% of the initial participation rate to FIT screening is it's 73%, and the compliance to diagnostic follow-up colonoscopy is around 82%. Next slide, please. For the Dutch setting, we have 2 microsimulation models, one from the ASCA from the Decision Modeling Center and the MISCOM from Erasmus. And besides many similarities between those models, there are also some differences in the underlying assumptions. For example, with the ASCA model, the adenoma, carcinoma pathway and the serrated lesion pathway are simulated, while with MISCOM only the adenoma pathway is simulated. In ASCA, we have age-specific adherence rates, while in MISCOM there are age endpoint-specific adherence rates. And in MISCOM, the assumption is made that the test results across rounds are correlated, and that the background risk for colorectal cancer is different between participants and non-participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francine. So this is just a very short idea, I would say, behind the models and the differences between the models. And then we use these 4 models all within their own setting to simulate 4 different scenarios for now, and we'll come to the extension later on, which is a comparator scenario, which would be like the counterfactual scenario, what would have happened in the absence of a COVID pandemic. So there was no disruption in screening and no impact on participation. So it's just continuing as we have done always. Then we have the first scenario, which is a 6-month screening disruption. And during the 6 months, the people that are not being invited are assumed to be completely missed. So they will, instead of a 2-year screening interval, actually end up having a 4-year interval for one time. Scenario 2 is similar in that respect, but rather than having a 6-month screening disruption, we're looking at a 12-month screening disruption. And then finally, in the third scenario, we not only assume a 6-month screening disruption in which people are being missed and so not screened, but we also assume that in the year following the disruption, so for 12 months, there is a recovery period where people participate only at half of the rates that they would usually participate in. So you only have 50% of your usual screening volume. So the future steps. So for the first paper, we're going to do a few more additional scenarios. It's not going to be huge because we really want to get this paper out of here. And we're going to see, we understand that not every model may be able to do all the scenarios, but we don't think that's a problem. We just want to see what everybody can do within the next 1.5 weeks. And that's what we're going to use as the basis for the paper. So we're going to look at a scenario of 3 months disruption, because that's currently the way the situation is looking. For example, in the Netherlands, we've restarted already. We're also going to look at other scenarios of lower participation in primary screening, but also looking at lower participation in diagnostic follow-up after a disruption. And we're also going to do a scenario where we do assume no disruption, like we've seen, for example, in Australia, but we do assume that there is some lower participation in primary screening and diagnostic follow-up. And we're going to look at different scenarios of catching up the missed screens. So are we capable of saying everybody that should have been screened in the 6 months during the disruption, are we capable of screening them all in the 6 months following? Or maybe that's not possible, but at least start screening them and then having other people being screened with a delay, so that it's more evenly, the burden of the disruption is more evenly distributed over the population. So those are just a few things that we're planning on modeling this week and next week. Then we want to write up those results in a paper and submit it soon. And in the meantime, we're going to work on at least 2 other papers, but we have a lot of other things in mind that we want to simulate. One paper will look at more real-world scenarios for disruption and after effects. So hopefully we will have some data, for example, from the Netherlands, but we'll see some more data sources later in the presentation, that we can really use the models to simulate those rather than the sort of hypothetical scenarios that we've worked with so far. And we want to look at different prioritization strategies to manage the surge of screening volume after disruption. Maybe we should start screening the elderly first, or maybe we should screen the people that are younger first, or maybe we should screen the first round first, or maybe we could even do it a little bit more risk-based, looking at gender, looking at prior screening results. So all of those prioritization strategies is a paper that we also want to get out. And then we have a lot of other things that we've discussed, which would probably be paper 4, 5, 6, etc. So there's definitely a lot of things to come still. I think that was it. Next slide, please. Yes, so thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them now or later, depending on what Karen thinks is best.
Thank you very much, Iris. If it's okay with everyone, I think we will move on. Perhaps we'll just take, I can't see, in fact, any questions yet, so I think we'll move on, but again, we can come back to questions later. And I want to thank Iris and everyone involved in that analysis, and I hope that those of you who are working across other cancer sites are inspired, because I think there will be some similarities in the questions that we want to address for other cancer screening programs. And as Iris said, I think the consistency of results there is reassuring. And you know, although we saw that in any one year the absolute or relative increase in colorectal cancer mortality is perhaps reasonably limited, it's a cumulative effect. And I think what we've already been able to characterize is this impact of this crisis would last for 5 to 10 years, even if the crisis period itself is only 12 months or so. So that really, I think, speaks to the remit of this group and looking at long-term recovery strategies over that period of time as well. So thank you, Iris. So I'm going to move on just quickly. Again, the summary on this slide is the 5 project teams that we've defined. Now, I wanted to give you just an admin update on that. All of you who signed up to a project team hopefully received an email this week about for the project teams that haven't yet kicked off about setting up, defining the project team, letting you know who else is on each project team, and we will be in touch with you this week with doodle polls to actually get the project team meetings set up for all of the other projects. And again, if you haven't yet registered and you do want to do that, please head to this jot form to do so. But again, emphasizing that we're really asking people as much as possible to focus their efforts on one team so that we can keep our working groups small for projects, or small enough. Now, I just wanted to quickly cover as well before we go on, those of you who have sent in information on potential data sources. And if we've missed something, and I know we heard at the very beginning of the call of registry information from Germany, please put it in the comments box and let the Secretariat know. But I wanted to take a moment, first of all, to acknowledge those listed here from our consortium that have noted that they have access to important sources of data. And those of you, the various project groups will be in touch with you about these data sources, and there will be much opportunity, I know, during the project meetings to discuss how they can be used in the modelling. And just as one example, as Iris said, the CRC group will be moving fairly soon on to real-world information on disruption data. And for example, with the information from Denmark, thank you very much, Ceci, for volunteering that connection. So thank you very much, and we will be working those through as we go. So I'm now going to move on to what we hope will be a more discussion-orientated piece for this meeting. And we hope that, as I said, inspired by what's been done in the CRC group, or even kicking off from that within the CRC group, we can have a little bit of a reflection on some of the key research questions for other teams to start thinking about. And so for 3 of the project teams, breast screening, cervical screening in high-income countries, and lung screening, the coordinating group has just put up a couple of starting questions to, I guess, encourage thinking and discussion. So what I'm going to do actually is, I've got up here the questions for breast screening. I'm going to allow you a little bit of time to digest that. But before we go on, I'd like to just get you to raise your hand if you would. If you had, we'll go back, while people are digesting that, we'll also go back to collate questions from Iris's presentation. So please raise your hand if you have a question from Iris's presentation about the CRC results, and or please note in the comment box. And we're going to, sorry, I'm just going here, Iris, to look at questions for you. So while you're thinking about questions for breast screen, please enter those as well. I'm going to raise the questions I've received for you, Iris, so we can talk about that while everyone's thinking about breast screening. So the first question I think is a general one from, I didn't catch your name, I think it was Rand from Germany. Don't we collect imperial data on disruption of screening? I think if I could give you the short answer, it's probably yes, we're certainly attempting to do that, and your data sources will be incredibly valuable. What Iris has presented is really what we saw as step 1, which is a more theoretical screening modelling approach just while we were getting it going and wanting to understand the models. Iris, did you want to comment further on that?
No, I think it's a very good point. This is exactly what we want to do for that real-world scenario where we really want to base that on historical data. I don't know, so we would have to discuss within the group what the possibilities are. I think for initially, I would go for the low-hanging fruit, the data sources that we know of and that we can quickly get data from, or that have been presented to us that we can quickly get data from. I don't know, Karen, if there is any plans for systematic looking through all the empirical data on disruption, but that might be something that we could do in coordination with the International Cancer Screening Network, for example, and maybe leave that collection of data to them, but exchange, and so that can feed into this modeling consortium. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I agree, Iris, and those of you who are on the first working group call might remember that Iris presented that the International Cancer Screening Network is doing a survey of member states essentially to understand what's happening at the program manager level, to understand what disruptions are occurring in the initial phase and what impact that had and how the policy decision was taken. So that will be a really important source of information for us. But I guess Iris, thinking out loud, that will capture probably the first stage of disruptions, and it would be good to maybe understand from ICSN if they're going to be looking at resurveys at any point. And also, yes, of course, the scientific literature will start to be very informative. So we will probably need to set up a systematic approach to scanning that.
Yeah, I agree.
So questions, okay, I'm going to keep going with the questions that we've received so far, and then we'll move maybe on to the breast screening issues. So from Annette, what happens to people who are out of the screening age range because of the disruption? Are they still considered in the catch-up screenings, or will they face a relatively high rate of non-diagnosed cancers? That's a very good question. I guess, Iris, you could answer that specifically for the analysis that we've done so far, but there's probably a more general answer. I'll hand to you.
Yes, so, yes, thanks. I thought it was a very good question, so I put already a response in the chat, but it depends on the scenario. So we've looked, not yet in the consortium, but for our analysis that we're doing for the Netherlands separately, we also looked at both types of scenarios. One where we catch everybody up, but if you're too old, you're outside of the age range, you fall out. And one where we do still continue then that you're at least getting your last screen. And we see that it makes quite a substantial difference what the impact of the disruption is. So based on that, my recommendation would be to catch up, even if you're outside the age range because of the disruption, because otherwise the impact on colorectal cancer mortality, and I think it holds for breast and cervical as well, is much bigger than when you don't catch up that last screen.
And perhaps the take home is that it's an important analysis to include that comparison in our models so that we can inform policymaker decision making on exactly that point and the investments that would be needed to make in the older ages. Fantastic. Well, in the absence of further questions for Iris, I'm going to now just go back to this slide on some ideas that we just put up here for discussion on what type of research questions might be important for breast screening programs. So as you saw with CRC, we can obviously, and would intend to, I assume, move fairly quickly just to characterize as best we can what actual impact the disruptions per se have as best we understand them now, and as we collate more data on the timing of potentially future waves of infections and shutdowns. So what is the increase in cancer incidence and mortality expected from disruptions is a key starting point for our analyses, obviously informed as best we can by real world data. And as we've alluded to before in this working group, we also will be connecting with the COVID modelers to actually understand their predictions for future infection rates to inform some future scenario modeling. What is the impact on overdiagnosis? We felt perhaps that this was an important one to us, particularly in the context of breast screening. And of course, there has been some discussion of silver linings. I guess one could say that from an overdiagnosis perspective, of course, we do expect a silver lining in terms of disruption, but perhaps most importantly, to frame those first two questions, how does the disruption impact the actual balance of benefits and harms of breast screening might be a good way to frame this. Furthermore, how does the disruption exacerbate or change existing inequities? And that could be considering by income level, cultural, ethnicity, or otherwise. And how could, as Iris alluded to, how could strategies for risk stratification play a role in optimising recovery, either at its most basic level by prioritising people in different age groups, or at more complex levels, considering screening history, even new possibilities for risk stratification, mammographic density, lifestyle factors, genetic factors, or combining all these in risk tools. So there is a possibility, and one might think of this as a bit of a silver lining, that the disruptions might in fact be a promoter of earlier adoption of risk stratification in the recovery phase, just because it will become so necessary to do that. So I'm going to open this up. We would love to see your thoughts and comments on these types of questions for breast screening. Obviously, the breast screening project team will be going away to refine their thinking about the key priority questions. But if there are any thoughts on any of these, please do enter them in the chat box. Just bear with me a minute, sorry, I'm just making sure I can see all the comments in the chat box. Okay, so I've got a question from Janine in Scotland. In our analysis of breast cancer in Scotland, we see differences in screening by hormone receptor status. That's a very good point. Janine, would you like to comment in person?
Sure. We just actually published our paper from Scotland using data since 1997, and we actually take into account missing data that we have. So we have over 20 years till 2016 data in terms of the incidence patterns of breast cancer. And actually it's unique in the UK that we have any of that information. So we've seen actually a drop off in recent years. So I just thought it'd be useful, given that it's one of the few cancers where we actually have molecular subtyping data. And actually, we actually have HER2 data as well, that we might be able to use some of that information in some of these models for incidence, because we don't really see as much of a benefit for the more aggressive hormone negative tumors, although there's still a benefit in mortality.
Absolutely, and that sounds like an immensely rich data source. Any responses or thoughts on that? Because I think, I guess the key will be connecting up that amazing data with a model platform that can rapidly adapt to using it. Are you already working with a modelling group of any kind, or?
No, but I know, I think Nora from UCL I saw her name in the group, and I know her from previous work, but I'm hoping we'll get more into this.
Fantastic, and I'm sure that other teams will be interested in the data source. Fantastic, thanks, Janine. So Isabel Portillo, I'll hand over to you. You've got a comment about deprivation index, which is well taken. Would you like to comment in person?
Yes, I think it's difficult to measure the deprivation index in all countries and in all regions, but I think it's important. Maybe the disruption and this kind of changes increase the inequities in access to any screening, and I think it's important to take into account and to adjust the all results are impacted by deprivation index. Is very important. I think so.
Can I make a comment on that? I think that because we're looking at that data as well in terms of our local NHS board. And I think what will be important for those models is access to healthcare, whether you have private or national healthcare systems. So here in Scotland, we actually don't see a big difference currently in screen detected tumors or even in the participation really as much. So I was actually kind of surprised by that, but I think access to health and the health services will make the bigger impact in terms of whether or not you'll see a difference by deprivation.
Okay, because deprivation index is a measure of SES, so in the UK that may or may not be well correlated with access to health services, is that correct?
It's definitely related to mortality, but in terms of we don't actually see a big difference in screen detected tumors, and we see high participation. So I think it's not so simple. In the US for sure,
yes.
Which is where I'm from.
Okay.
We detect the same question, yes, in mortality and in lesions in colorectal cancer are more advanced in people who have most level of deprivation, and that it is important to take into account, for the future research.
Thank you very much. So I have another comment here from Cisse. Would you like to speak in person?
Yeah, sure. In Denmark, we see some reduction in participation in breast cancer, and we were wondering how women seem to think that the risk of having breast cancer and the risk of having COVID, they seem to value this differently, because some doesn't want to go to breast cancer screening because they are afraid of giving COVID-19. And we actually set up some telephone calls to all the non-attenders in a small period to see if we can get a feeling about what is this all about, and are there some women that value this differently, and if there are other countries that have made this exercise, we would be very interested in this to see if there are differences or similarities. And is it the deprived women that think that the risk of COVID is greater than the risk of breast cancer? Or
I mean, it occurs to me there's just an incredibly important primary data collection activity there about understanding sort of the psychosocial impacts on each side, you know, the fear of COVID versus, you know, and actually getting these intermodels in terms of disutilities or other forms of quantifying those trade-offs that women feel and will see as we go through this crisis. Great. Well, I'm going to suggest, thank you very much. That's some thought-provoking comments. And again, this is just the start of a conversation, just to get us thinking about the projects. I'm going to move on to cervical screening. And again, the team's just put a few questions here for your thoughts, example research questions. And bearing in mind that, of course, there's a linked set of questions for cervical cancer around HPV vaccination disruptions. So, of course, again, one question, what is the increase in cancer incidence and mortality expected? I think a very interesting question that our team has been quite focused on in Australia is actually how does the recent transition to primary HPV screening, which is ongoing, about to happen or happened fairly recently in many countries, how does it actually change the robustness of the screening and vaccination programs to disruption? And one might theorize here that because a longer screening interval is adequate for primary HPV than used to be the case in cytology, that that the system is a little more robust to disruption because you have more time to reach women with the regular screening interval. So that, I think, is an important analysis to think about. Again, how does the disruption exacerbate or change existing inequities? And then a kind of an equivalent of the recovery risk-based approach. How can HPV screening play a role in optimizing screening recovery, considering all of the variables, including HPV vaccination status, age, the role of the newer types of HPV tests which give you a partial genotype, and all the emerging new triage technologies. So just some example questions there. Happy to take on board any comments or thoughts? So I see Coda. Hi, Coda. You've got a comment there. Would you like to speak? It's about SES.
Yeah, I just had a comment about lifestyle changes. And we are planning to do a survey on lifestyle changes after COVID-19. So it is related to maybe smoking is related to lung cancer, but yeah, I mean, not only screening but also other lifestyles or behavior is affected by COVID-19.
And again, that will be an incredibly valuable source of information for people in Japan. So thank you. I think that type of data can be used directly in modelling. Great, thank you. Sylvia, did I hear your voice?
Karen, yes, I was, hello. I was just writing the comment. I think we should really include here self-sampling, because
yes,
it's not
you're right.
HPV-based screening is as well the performance of something they optimize the uptake.
You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry for the omission, but of course self-sampling, self-collection, when the woman can potentially take a sample at home without exposing herself to health services at all, might become an even more prominent strategy. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on, and I know this is just giving us some taste, a taste of the possibilities here, but just to touch also before we wind up today on some of the important questions for lung screening. Again, what is the increase in incidence and mortality? But here in lung screening, for those that are involved in this area of research, we wondered whether it was important to focus on the impact of potential delays to implementation of screening, given its status as something that has been rolled out partially or completely in some but not all high-income countries. Again, how does the disruption exacerbate inequities? And again, how could risk stratification play a role? So please do note in the comment section if you have any thoughts or additions that you'd like to speak to immediately on these types of ideas. Okay, and clearly, and I think this speaks to why we're keen to move to the project groups, which will be smaller focus groups that will be able to really pick apart and understand and agree on priorities. I think, of course, these research questions as they're phrased now are very much just starting from scratch. The research questions themselves have to be adjusted in a way to the data sources as we move through, and we have to develop our priorities as we have capacity. I've just got a question from David. David, did you want to speak? You had a question about why incidence would increase. I think the answer is I meant in the context of a disruption if you have an existing program, but
yeah.
So please go ahead. Yeah.
It's different. I think in the lung cancer world, we're seeing far fewer referrals, and because the median survival of lung cancer is a matter of 6 months, and we've seen only 1/5 of the referrals coming through and less than 50% of the cancers coming through, it's obvious that many of these patients will have died without even being labelled as cancer. So we're expecting to see a reduction in incidence during the pandemic phase, and which will probably continue as people continue not to come with their symptoms, and late stage disease will probably continue to be misdiagnosed as pneumonia or even COVID. What we're wondering about is how this impacts on the stage in the patients that have maybe would normally have presented with non-cancer symptoms, which leads them to have a scan and then they get the relatively early stage diagnosed. And so I think we're going to see quite a marked reduction in incidence of cancer. We know from other studies that of large GP data sets that there's a lot of ascertainment bias when you do more tests in lung cancer. We saw a 40% increase in early deaths from lung cancer if you do more chest x-rays in primary care, for example. So it may be different in the rapidly lethal cancer that's lung cancer.
I think that's a point very well taken. Thank you. And I guess we even saw that initial incidence decrease, predicted for colorectal cancer in the results that we presented earlier. It's just a detection effect. Yeah. And in fact, Iris, of course, presented last time at our meeting on the early emergent data from the Netherlands showing exactly that decrease for several cancer types, which is very concerning. So thank you. That's an important clarification. Okay, I greatly apologise because I think this has been a wonderful start of a whole series of conversations, but we will have to, in the interest of time, wind up. And I just wanted to give you an overview of the future call schedule and next steps. So at this point, we propose that this whole working group, this screening working group, has another call around the end of August, which will give all of the project teams time to hopefully get to the stage of being able to present initial results, as we've seen for the colorectal group today. And so the big focus for us will be getting the project group meetings going for all of the other streams of work. However, that's just our proposal. If you have strong feelings or even weak feelings on your preferences for the frequency of timings of calls, please do contact our secretariat or leave a comment in the box here, and we'll take that on board when we schedule the calls. I'd just like to ask now if there's any other business, please, in the interest of making sure I can see you, please raise your hand, and I'll just check in the comments box, but if you can use the hand raise function if there's any other business to be raised. Now I've just seen, sorry, I'll just go back. I've got two more comments that actually relate to the lung cancer discussion. Coda's pointed out that it's worth looking at overdiagnosis in lung cancer as well. Yes, that's well noted and point taken indeed. And Annette has noted that smoking cessation campaigns and interventions are key in the implementation of lung screening, and that's absolutely right. How the impact on cessation campaigns within lung screening programs might have an impact in the COVID months. So that's a really important overlay. Thank you, and it should be an evaluation focus. So I can't see any other hands raised. My apologies if I've missed it, but I can't see those. So I'm going to move at the close of the hour to thank you very much. I'd like, as always, to thank our amazing secretariat, Harriet Quee and Catherine Barron. I'd like to thank the Colorectal Cancer Group for working so hard to present those results today, and to all of you for your ongoing participation. It's really gratefully received, and you know, I think in the midst of this crisis, it's exciting to see how fast this group is coming together. So we will be in touch with you shortly, and thank you again.